Well, welcome to Lucas Diesel Training Series. My name is Tony Salas. Thank you for joining me. The subject for today is going to be diesel fuel review and a look at R99. Now, before I get started, one thing I should tell you is that it's been a learning curve updating my diesel fuel content. In my Diesel Master Course online, I actually make a segment on what is diesel fuel, which we'll go over. You'll see some of it. However, though, I had to update it with the new type of renewable and biodiesels and high performance diesels that are out there. So please note, I am no chemist, but yet we do have to communicate some information regarding what I have found out in my research on what is going on with diesel fuel. So let's get first started with the basics. When we talk about the basics of diesel fuel, we usually talk about ultra low sulfur diesel, ULSD, and in this case, it could also be called ultra low sulfur fuel diesel. ULSD or ULSF, and in this case what it all comes down to is how much sulfur content is in the fuel. So when we look at low sulfur fuel, better known as LSF, we are talking about 500 parts per million. Now you're probably asking yourself, why do I need to know this? Because it actually relates to the recommended fuel from the manufacturers. What do I mean by that? Well, since the introduction of catalyst and after treatment systems, one thing we have found out is that sulfur is an enemy of catalysts. So I guess what we're trying to say is sulfur can be detrimental to a catalyst. What are we talking about? Diesel oxidation catalyst and NOx reduction catalyst as well. So one thing we got to keep in mind is that the sulfur content is a problem. So when you go south of the border here, for example, where there is low sulfur fuel of 500 parts per million, the nozzle tends to be bigger, and that would mean that we definitely are running 500 parts per million. Now, when you and me talk about fuels, and we've talked about this in the past in previous presentations, we know that sulfur is related to the lubrication factor of the fuel itself. Well, here's the thing though, as I talk about 15 parts per million and 500 parts per million, that is the maximum allowable sulfur content in the fuel, maximum. But you know what's funny? Here in the United States, we do not have a minimum. So in this case, sulfur has no minimum requirement that it's supposed to have. It's supposed to have maximum 15 parts per million for the most part at every conventional fuel station. So that creates a problem. That's why one of the things I tell people is that if you want a clear indicator of what your sulfur content is in the fuel, it's actually the algae growth. What keeps algae growth at bay, a lot of it is sulfur. Not all of it, but a lot of it is actually sulfur. So when we see severe algae growth in the fuel, that's usually a telltale that that fuel has very low sulfur content. Another thing we associate sulfur with is cetane, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And cetane actually is, again, the ability for that diesel to burn, create more power. Look at it that way. You know, we often compare cetane with actually what? We compare it with gasoline. What do we use with gasoline? Well, I'll let you figure that one out. However, though, in this case, it does affect, again, the cetane value as well. So right now, as we look at most of your pumps, on the 49 state deal, not in California, you're going to see ultra low sulfur diesel. Well, you're going to see it in California too, but they got others. And in this case, it'll clearly say on the tag that we got 15 parts per million. Again, this is what the law requires. Now, if we are using the red dye or the red fuel, as some people like to call it, that's the non-highway diesel fuel. Please note about the only difference between the ultra low sulfur diesel and the ultra low sulfur non-highway, in other words, the red fuel, is actually one's taxed and the other one's not. It used to be different, but no longer. So in this case, they're both, if you can see by the tags, they're both 15 parts per million because we see now, for example, equipment that is used in the agriculture community that also has after treatment as well, so they require also 15 parts per million maximum of sulfur content. And then for other applications such as locomotive and marine, you're going to notice that they're still using low sulfur diesel, which is at 500 parts per million. So therefore, that is still being used. Now, the ignorant thing that a lot of people do is that they don't realize that, again, the reason for the low sulfur is, again, to protect the catalysts. So in this case, when you put on 500 parts per million, are you endangering, or like we like to call, poisoning the actual diesel fuel? Yeah, you are. So in this case, that creates a little bit of a problem because of the fact that, that is going to actually contaminate that, in other words, poison those catalysts. So keep that in mind. So as we move along, we associate, like I said before, lubricity is actually associated with sulfur, but in reality, sulfur is not a lubricant, but it can be combined with nickel and metal alloys to create a low melting alloy that can increase the lubricity. So, however, the process used to reduce sulfur also reduces the fuel's lubricating properties. So what's the issue on today's fuel? Bottom line is low lubricity. So that creates a bit of a problem. We can talk about CP4, we can talk about injectors, the ball and seat on the LB7 and, Bosch injectors and so on, because lubricity tends to be a problem. So there's also discussion on the definition of lubricity. That's up for argument. So in diesel fuels, such as air in the fuel as well. So please note, something you got to keep in mind is that as that fuel is sloshing in the tank, is it actually going to get aerated where it gets micro bubbles of air that can be in the fuel? Yeah. So therefore, that could be a little bit or detrimental to the actual function of that diesel fuel in today's common rail injection system. So, but again, let's get it clear that lubrication tends to be a problem sometimes. But sulfur is usually associated with two topics for diesel fuel: lubricity and cetane, like I mentioned earlier. So we're trying to clarify this. So what is cetane? Simply put, cetane is a chemical compound found naturally in diesel, and it ignites easily under pressure. So we all know we're using compressed ignition in diesel. So because of its high flammability, it serves as the industry standard measure for evaluating the fuel combustion quality. Specifically, the measure is referred to as a cetane number. So again, we need to understand that. It serves as an industry standard for measure of its fuel combustion quality. So there's got to be a number associated with that. So the magic number that comes in my head is 34, but am I correct? I'll tell you that in a bit. But in this case, please note, cetane is what we look at on today's diesel fuel and on the pumps on what that cetane value it is. Now, when you are working in the shop, because you're probably saying, why am I learning all of this? Because today's diesel fuel is not the same. Let me stop for a minute. In other words, when I talk to new diesel owners, let's say they just bought a light duty diesel, 1500 series truck with a light duty diesel. And the thing is, they often associate diesel with, well, it can go very good fuel economy, which in some cases that can be true. And it can also doesn't require as much maintenance. Well, that's not true. It does require a lot of maintenance, just like any old diesel. However, though, the problem that we have in our industry is there is no consistency, and hear me correctly, there is no consistency in diesel fuel. In other words, is diesel fuel the same no matter where you buy it? If we're talking about all the states here in the United States, if I travel, am I going to get the same? No. A good classic example to tell you about cetane and sulfur content is, here I live in Las Vegas. So if I go to Southern California, let's say San Diego, and I take my 6-liter diesel and I travel, on the way there, I'm lucky if I get 19, maybe hit 20 miles per gallon, but average 19 per gallon. I will fill up in Southern California with their ultra low sulfur diesel, and I will come back and I'm lucky if I hit 16. So what's that tell you about the cetane values? So something to keep in mind, when it comes to diesel, because a very popular complaint we get from truck drivers, hotshot drivers, or simply, your everyday Joe owner of a diesel truck is that, why is it that this time I got this kind of fuel economy and this time I got this different fuel economy? The question is, what's the quality of diesel fuel that you're using? So that's a problem. So the higher the fuel cetane number, the quicker it ignites. And that carries a variety of benefits for diesel equipment, from increased fuel economy to fewer emissions to better power output. Fast combustion is a key to a diesel's engine performance. So as you start the pilot injection, because as you know in common rail, you have pilot injection hitting before top dead center of the piston. Yes, my fist represents the piston. But as we go from before top dead center to top dead center to after top dead center, We are actually having this gas is actually burned even all the way quite a bit of degrees after top dead center. That's why we have post injections, not only for post injections because of emissions, but we also have post injections for better performance. In other words, let's try to actually get the full swing out of that stroke coming out of that power stroke on that engine. So in this case, that's where cetane comes in. So the scale for measuring cetane ranges from 0 to 100, and the higher the number, the better. Modern highway diesel vehicles tend to require fuel with a cetane ranging from 45 to 55. Typically, number 2 diesel has a cetane number of 40 to 42, while premium diesel has 47 to 52, which is your luck if you get that. So one of the things you want to be purchasing, if you want to test at least the basics of basics in your diesel fuel, and I challenge you to look at your diesel fuel, is that you may want to invest in a fuel hydrometer. They cost about $100 to $140. You can get one, and what you're simply doing using a hydrometer to test, again, the actual weight or specific gravity of that diesel fuel. And a lot, it can tell you with cetane values as well. So in this case, that tells you a whole heck of a lot. Like I've said in previous webinars, one of the things you can do is you can take samples of fuel stations from all around like I have, and it's scary what we get from one fuel station to the other when it comes to the specific gravity, which relates to the cetane value as well. So now, when I talk to a customer and he tells me, hey, I'm using this fuel additive, right? And he's using this fuel additive and he tells me, I picked up 1 or 2 miles per gallon using his additive. That usually is a red flag. What was used to raise that cetane value very high? And in many cases, it's actually a high sulfur content that is found in that. So that tends to not be good because, again, sulfur is, again, detrimental to your catalyst, like we said before. But then we go to basics. We talk about diesel number 1 and diesel number 2, right? Diesel number 1 is also known as the winter diesel. A lot of you know it already. It is thinner than diesel number 2 and is better for cold temperatures. Okay, that's what it's designed for. It has a lower viscosity and it doesn't gel in freezing temperatures. That's diesel number 1. But it also burns hotter and faster, so you'll need to fill up more frequently. So one of the key things I see with people I talk to in cold areas is that they're telling me that, if I sit with the truck running overnight, it actually goes through a lot of fuel in extreme cold. Well, of course, because diesel number 1 also burns, again, hotter and faster, so it does get poor fuel economy. That's what you're going to see. Well, diesel number 2 is less volatile and gives better fuel economy. So in this case, they can vary, one being cost and so on, depending on what vehicles you use. So therefore, diesel number 2 tends to be the all-around diesel for normal average temperatures from pretty cold to very hot. What is the average cutting point where we start thinking about using an anti-gel agent or diesel number 1 is probably when you get into the freezing temperatures of, as you know, water freezes at 32 degrees. So again, 30 degrees or lower tends to be, where you might consider using a gel agent. Now, if we talk to people that live in this, they're going to tell you a different perspective, but in this case, please note, you got to use that kind of gelling agent, right? Now, for the most part, when we look at your pumps, we are used to the tag that we see or the decals that are found on the pump. That is changing, especially if you're from California in certain metropolitan areas. But in this case, diesel number 2 is the one we're going to find pretty much at most pumps. Now, later on, we're going to talk about renewable diesel, R99. We're going to talk about biodiesel here in a bit. But please note that, diesel number 2 is the all-around ultra low sulfur diesel for the maximum of 15 parts per million, which is what we're supposed to have. But again, remember, 15 parts per million is the actual maximum amount of sulfur content allowed. But again, it doesn't tell you what the minimum is. That's why I've always been talking about, and if you saw our previous webinar last year talking about fuel additives, we got to remember when we talk about fuel additives, we're talking about cleaners, we're talking about lubricants, we're talking about cetane improvers. That's what actually helps the diesel fuel itself, not to mention, like I said already, we don't know the consistency of that number 2 diesel fuel that we buy at the pump. In other words, it's always the same. I won't name names or states, but I'll put it to you this way. I've had people actually buy diesel fuel. Their truck's been running great. They fuel in this city outside of their state. Next thing you know, the water and fuel light comes on, right? And they're calling me saying, hey, I don't know what happened. We just filled up. We ran it for about 50 miles, and all of a sudden the WIF light, water and fuel light, comes on. What's that tell you about the water content that might be in that fuel they bought at this no-name fuel station? Okay. So again, if you are doing repair, and you're replacing injectors, pumps, you're flushing out tanks, it's a good idea to test the fuel where the customer is actually buying their fuel. In other words, what is the quality of that diesel fuel that you're buying to as well? All right. So we were talking about number one, number two, and in this case, there is an anti-gel additive. There are sold, especially in colder countries or high altitude areas. Right now it's already late September of 2024, and we're already seeing some of these areas up to the north of us already getting some patches of snow. So already we might be looking at the need of number one or some type of anti-gel, it's available. So the reason why we have to add an anti-gel additive is because diesel fuels contain wax, the paraffin, if you will. Normally the wax is a liquid in solution in the fuel. The problem when the wax is when it gets too cold, it starts to actually to gel, and gel fuel or crystallizes can block engine oil filters, like you can see there on the actual diagram here on our slide. So yeah, big problem there, ain't it? So therefore, cold weather does not work. So like I told you, what is the cutoff point on when you're supposed to use anti-gel? Temperatures below 32 degrees are pretty much it. So like it says right here on the slide, smart to use some anti-gel as temperatures approach what we call the freezing point. Generally, you will be able to use a smaller amount of anti-gel. The warmer or less cold, as the case may be, the temperatures are. So follow the instructions on the bottle when you buy anti-gel. A good example is one time I was coming from back east training, going home to Las Vegas, and I stopped and stayed in Flagstaff, and it snowed overnight, and it was below zero, almost close to zero, I should say, there overnight. So I'm like, oh crap, I don't have, my truck is a desert truck. I got I don't use block heaters or anything. But in this case, it was concerning. So do I need some gelling? Is this actually going to become, real wax buildup on my filters? Luckily, it all started, and I'm thankful also to the fact that the HFCM on those, the horizontal field conditioning module, those actually has an electric heater that helps a little bit. So in this case, prevents against the gelling. But when you get under zero, basically you should use more anti-gel as the temperatures get colder. Also check your manufacturers or engine suggestions on heating your engine block in extremely cold temperatures. Now things have changed. We have DEF fluid now on trucks, right? Not that it relates to diesel fuel, but I am finding now in the north and colder areas, and those of you that are in the south or mid-south that don't ever see these cold temperatures, they are now selling complete blanket assemblies that go around the DEF tanks underneath the whole vehicle itself that keeps it electrically heated. So not only are you plugging in the engine block heater, but you're also plugging in a blanket or some type of complete assembly that keeps the underside of that vehicle. Not to mention it helps the after treatment catalyst as well. So if there's fast drops in temperature, that's another thing to keep in mind. If the temperature is set to plummet rapidly, and it's best to use more anti-gel in preparation for those temperatures that are already low. So therefore, it is best to use that anti-gel when you're in very cold areas. But when it comes to common rail failure and we see pump failure, we always have said, what is the number one enemy of common rail has always been, again, contamination. So contamination is a big problem, not to mention now that we got DEF fluids being used out there, we might have that driver or that fleet driver driving a truck that might accidentally pour a few ounces of DEF fluid into the fuel. So I'm a big advocate of using Diesel Craft. They actually sell test strips. You can use, like I said already, your hydrometers. And again, you can also use other testers to test the quality of fuel. But again, you got to know how much contamination there might be in that diesel fuel. Let me stop for a minute. How do you know that the diesel fuel in that tank is indeed complete ultra low sulfur diesel or whatever diesel they're running? Is it contaminated, in other words? But fuel filtration is very important. We cannot stress that enough. People ask me, what is your recommended interval for changing fuel filters? Due to the fact that our fuel can be, because Las Vegas, where I live, is a big, shall I say, a lot of people come and go. transient town, if you will. And in this case, we don't know what fuel they're running. We don't know when's the last time they did their fuel filter changes. So we're recommending fuel filter change every other oil change, because again, you cannot be safe. You cannot, be cheap about your common rail system. Oh, remember, what is the price of a common rail system if you have complete, catastrophic damage, right? It can actually be in the thousands of dollars. So what's a cheap preventive maintenance you can do is to actually change those fuel filters. Don't get me wrong, I've changed fuel filters every other change and they look great. Kind of made a sin to replace them. But no, we want to keep in mind that I don't know what fuel this vehicle is going to see eventually. So we don't know if it's contaminated or not. So therefore, please keep that in mind. Okay, what's going on with the fuel? We don't know what's going on with fuel. Well, let me tell you, we've had some Sunday surprises. The worst one that I've ever seen was we had a Power Stroke 6.7, no injection at all. Fuel rail pressure was there, and turns out that this guy had purchased some bio cheap diesel in Arizona when he was traveling through there, and it actually solidified. It was all full of glycerin solidification. So like what you see, sort of like looking like the one on that bottle right there. But what I'm just trying to say is that it was so bad, the glycerin content in that diesel fuel, that the nozzles were stuck shut. There was no way it was going to lift and open. So yeah, so therefore it needed a complete common rail system. It needed that tank to be removed, and you should have seen the gunk of junk that we took out of that tank. So yeah, that can be a little bit of a problem. So here's some examples. I'm sure most of you have seen some dirty filters, or filters that just have not been changed, they just have not been changed. And in this case, you see, whatever crap that they are. A joke that I made for the longest time here is my customers from the north of us here, because there's a lot of alfalfa fields, and I will never understand how they get so much hay. Yes, hay, Hay. They get so much hay in those tanks and just contaminate the tanks, right? We've seen silly things such as, of some of the bottles of additives, that little seal on top of the cap right there. They actually, it all gets in there. We've taken tanks down and it's just full of those little plastic covers for those fuel additive caps, And I'm sure some of you have seen that too as well. So as we talk about the newer fuels, right, when we go away from diesel fuel, in other words, conventional ultra low sulfur diesel fuel, when you go to, for example, in California, you're seeing a lot of difference. I've already seen it myself when I've traveled there. One time we're in a rental car because I was doing some training classes out of Chatsworth, and all of a sudden I look at the diesel pump and I'm like, what the hell is all of this, right? We don't see this in Nevada yet. It's coming soon perhaps to your area, because due to their emission regulations, they're now pushing some kind of renewable fuel or some kind of biodiesel, right? So when you look at a sticker like the one right here, you're going to see, and I believe, let me collect this one, what you're going to see right there is, you got 80% biomass based diesel fuel, then it says biodiesel fuel. You're like, well, hold on a second. What am I seeing here? Is this biodiesel? Because on this pump, you're going to see you got B20, right? Biodiesel, but it's clearly marked as biodiesel B20. Now, we're going to see not ultra low sulfur diesel, not number 2. We're now seeing biodiesel. But as we introduce you guys that don't have this, like us, when I started seeing this, I'm like, well, this is new. What are we talking about here? Well, there's obviously ultra low sulfur fuel, there's low sulfur fuel, and now there's also, biodiesel. Now, y'all know about biodiesel, many of you, but in this case, the number next to the B represents the percentage of bio content that's in that diesel fuel. It's still ultra low sulfur diesel, but they've added, in this case, 20% of bio products in it, right? So in this case, that's kind of interesting the way that works, So what is this? Well, this is biodiesel. Okay, so you're literally buying B20. Now here, so you can understand, us here in Nevada, here in Las Vegas, Southern Nevada, Clark County, the most you can buy that I've seen at pumps is actually B2, maybe B5, but that's about it. But one thing we have found out with biodiesel is that if you really want to use biodiesel, it tends to be more expensive than ultra low sulfur diesel, at least in our area and the research that I've done in the past. So that has changed. Okay, that is definitely a change. But again, the sticker is going to confuse you a little bit on what you're looking at. Well, in this case, I know that this is biomass. So this is a blend, right? So we're mixing 20% of bio with the conventional ultra low sulfur diesel. So the number next to the B represents the percentage. For example, years ago, John Deere, for example, was recommending as much as B100. And I don't know if they like that idea because 100% bioproducts, that didn't work that great in cold areas for the simple fact that that's where we had the wax buildup occur and the glycerin buildup occur, the solidification of those paraffin wax products that we were talking about. So that has also changed as well. So before I get into bio, let me take some of the confusion that I found. I've seen some YouTube videos talking about top tier diesel fuel. As a matter of fact, some manufacturers, I know for example Duramax does, I didn't get a chance to check Ram and some other manufacturers, but one thing you're going to find is there's now a certification, it seems like, for top tier fuel. Now, top tier, and you're welcome to Google top tier and look at what they're recommending because top tier can relate to gasoline and also to diesel fuel. So after doing some research, top tier must meet some certain guidelines, but please note this is voluntary. Okay, they're not making oil companies actually meet the top tier standard, but they set a guideline on what fuel is. Okay, so when you look at a pump, as you can see on the pictures right here, if you want to buy the best quality diesel out there, top tier kind of set a standard on, again, the lubrication process. Excuse me, the lubrication process, along with what's going on with the lubrication factor, the cleaning factor, and all of this. Sorry, I had to lubricate the throat here, but so what I'm trying to say is top tier is now a, shall I say, certification that is available for different fuel supply, and in other words, fuel providers, is it top tier diesel fuel? Well, if you go to the website, you're going to find out that about the only fuel out there that meets the top tier is actually Costco. Literally, if you don't believe me, that is out there. I was like, oh my God, really? So unfortunately, if you want to look at it that way, unfortunately, even though it sets a standard for better quality of diesel fuel, because remember I talked about that no minimum sulfur content? Because the law, you're probably saying, why are they doing this? Because the law set the standard for the maximum, but not the minimum. Now, those of you that might be watching from Canada or outside of Europe, for example, in Europe, Canada and Europe, in many of those countries, they have a lubrication standard. We don't have one here in the United States. So therefore, when you look at top tier, I can understand why they do that based on my little backyard testing that I have done and finding out that not all diesel is the same. So therefore, you see a cetane value, you don't know if it meets that cetane value. And when I buy the kit from, whoever I bought it from, and I use the hydrometer, there's a little chart that tells you, this is specific gravity, this is the cetane value of that diesel fuel. And you're going to find out that doesn't always meet that cetane value. So what do you do? So again, is diesel fuel, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, is diesel fuel all the same? And the answer is no. So here's our website right there. Like I said, you're welcome to visit, and you can see that they're toptiergas.com, but they also have for gasoline and for diesel fuel as well. So you can go to their website and check those. But you're going to find out the stations that are only available at this time is who? Costco. So therefore, there is their website again for approved diesel fuel brands as well. So can't say enough about that, but it's nice to see. In a way, I like it. Oh, no, I do like it because of the fact that it'd be nice to make these fuel, companies actually, have some type of standard for, hey, is this good quality diesel fuel? Even though it's ULSD, ultra low sulfur diesel, is it good stuff with the correct cetane value, with the correct package that it's supposed to have? So very important to have. Very nice. So hope you guys understand that. Now, moving on. Biodiesel. Let's start off with biodiesel. Biodiesel has been around for a long time. I spent a weekend, I was training in outside the state here, and I was working. He says, Tony, I blend my own biodiesel. And this guy, God bless him, he taught me a lot that weekend because he actually was making the certified biodiesel. And he went through the whole process of biodiesel. So when I look at different, for those of you that are wondering where do they get this bio from, conventional ones that we see around here is, like the McDonald's French fry oil like we have. Let me give you an example. Years ago, this is a funny story. I had this company call me, and they were starting a trash business, and they bought this old Mac trash truck, right? And they could not meet the emissions, right? They do opacity test here in Clark County, and they could not meet that requirement. So the thing is, earlier that day, it was just fate. Because earlier that day, I had this guy come by saying, hey, at the shop, and he said, listen, we got some biodiesel. And I'm like, okay, whose biodiesel is it? And is it certified bio? So when you talk about bio, the question is, whose bio is it? Well, this guy was doing his own backyard blends in his own little shop that he had here in Las Vegas. Thing is, let's sidebar on that. So I told him, thank you. If I ever need biodiesel, I'll give you a call, but I ain't putting that stuff in my trucks, because who knows how much wax and glycerin does it have in it? Because the minute it gets cold, what's going to happen again to that stuff? It's going to solidify, right? So no. So fortunately, it was our warm time of the year. It wasn't hot, but it was warm time of the year, averaging 80, 90s, right? And the thing is, they brought me this Mack truck later on that afternoon. It just happened to be the same day. And they're like, Tony, this thing is it's blowing some particulates, some black smoke, but it's just not passing the opacity levels. And the thing is, and they're like, this is an old dog. We just need it to last 6 months, and then we're going to get rid of it or junk it. It's an old truck, but we just need it for the business. And I thought about this bio guy. I said, you know what? I might have an answer. So let's try this. So I called the bio guy. He was surprised I called him. Bring your stuff down. We're going to buy some. And we put it in this truck. And let me tell you, it was pretty funny because after running the truck for a while, getting that stuff to go through there, we're keeping it warm. The exhaust smelled literally like McDonald's French fries, man. So they took it down that same afternoon back to the labs to get it tested, and it actually passed on the opacity levels. I mean, it passed. It ran clean, you know. And what's funny is that how do I say this? What's funny is that the engineers or the inspectors working at the state level, they're at the labs, would actually reject. They're like, what did you do to the truck? You think they would smell it, right? But no, that didn't tick on them. But in this case, they could not believe, how did you reduce the opacity level so fast within a few hours? So it kind of tells you what went on with. Obviously, when we finally argued and fought, and they did meet I told the guys, burn this stuff out, keep that engine hot, and then put back ultra low sulfur diesel if you want to keep it running, right? But in this case, it kind of tells you the advantage of biodiesel, because biodiesel has great properties for burning and creating good power, burning clean, but it doesn't. The main thing we see with biodiesel, along with other things, is contamination, first of all. And two is actually its resistance, or its cloud point. Yeah, it's called cloud point. How well does it work when cold? So that creates a little bit of problem. So therefore, it is common for gelling and thickening. And B20 is recommended. So most manufacturers, a while years ago, probably 5 years ago, I looked at many of the not service manuals, but owner's manuals. Most of the people, from Ram to Cummins to, Duramax, all the light duty stuff out there, Powerstroke was not recommending no more than B20. So in this case, again, the question is, whose bio is it? Let me take it a step further. Is it certified? Yeah, is it certified, or is it some guy's backyard blend? So we'll talk more about this, but it does make fatty acid methyl esters. So what is the thing that we try to do with new renewable diesel? Well, they call it, and believe me, I'm going to try to read this. I actually wrote as transesterification. There, I said it. So therefore, transesterification is the process where they're trying to convert the fats and oils into biodiesel. Because again, you are creating glycerin, all the stuff, but again, you're trying to reduce also not only the fats and oil, but also the paraffins. So here I'm going to get myself into chemist area. So if I make a mistake, I'm trying, because I did my homework a little bit here. There is biodiesel, and then there is renewable diesel. The funny thing is, they both use the same stock of whatever they're using, whether it being oils, whether it being other stuff that's used that is used in biodiesel. So there's biodiesel, and then there's renewable diesel. But the greatest thing about renewable diesel is that through transesterification, they are able again to have this diesel work in colder climates, which they can actually again work with that cloud point that we're talking about. Okay, so again, there's biodiesel, and then there's what? Renewable diesel. Let's get that clear. Okay, there's two different ones. Biodiesel means that it is mixed with conventional ultra sulfur diesel, while renewable diesel is 100% some kind of biomass content, but it's actually transesterification is used to actually make it work with diesel. In other words, let's use those fats and oils into biodiesel, which again helps also lower the paraffin issue. But let's step back for a minute before, because I just introduced it there. I'll try to get more technical here. There is what we call BQ 9000, and you're welcome to Google all of this because I learned some of it, and I actually talked to a few people on this. Now, it is a cooperative and voluntary program for the accreditation of U.S. biodiesel marketers and producers. It combines the requirements of the ASTM standard for biodiesel, which is the D675-1. So when you buy biodiesel, what you want to see is that does it meet the ASTM 675-1. For example, when I was working in Washington at a few shops, I saw biodiesel. I happened to talk to the people there. Are you meeting the 6751 ASTM certification? And many said no. So therefore, you don't know if it's good quality diesel. It could actually have all the attributes that you want in biodiesel. It may work, but the problem is the harm that it can do to your common rail or conventional pump system, right? You don't want that glycerin. You don't want that wax, all those fatty oils that may not be actually refined correctly. And in this case, it can actually cause issues. So that's the issue going on. So if let's say you talk to a guy with a 7.3 diesel and you talk to a guy with a common rail like a Denso common rail on an L5P, big difference because the clearances and the passages are so micro tiny, it doesn't take a lot of junk to clog those injectors and hurt those pumps. It'll lubricate wonderfully. However, though, it can contaminate and clog and stick stuff. So that's the problem. So the bottom line is it's a voluntary program. There's no law that says that biodiesel must meet the certification. So all over the United States, hell, even when I traveled to Hawaii, where they use the fish oil and also the sunflower oil, right? We're not sure if they all meet the ASTM 6751. I train in certain, I won't name the state because it'll give it away, but I know states where, the DOT and other, agencies and fleets buy the biodiesel, and then I found out it does not meet the D675-1 certification. But like I told you earlier this presentation, okay, we know now that, that in other words, that they are using it, the biodiesel. It is mixed with conventional ultra sulfur diesel, but the problem is that we don't know what its detrimental effects are, and it doesn't meet the certification. So kind of makes you wonder why they're buying it, right? Well, they're probably getting it a killer deal. But in order to meet, and let me get this clear because I said it before, in order to meet that ASTM 6751 certification, it usually costs a lot more. So when I'm hearing about biodiesel, I usually like to hear the word methanol and ethanol because that's what you need to actually meet that requirement. So if I don't hear those methanol, ethanol, that kind of is a red flag, especially methanol. That's telling me most likely does not meet the ASTM's 6751 standard. So as I look for more here, what's funny is there's many backyard companies. I call them backyard, companies. In other words, they're making their blends in their backyard. But what's funny is that here in the state of Nevada, right, I found this, and it says there that, where is it at? It actually says it is unlawful for any person to sell, offer for sale, assist in the sale, or deliver, or permit to sold, or offer any biodiesel, biomass, diesel, or biomass-based diesel blend unless it meets the applicable registration requirements for fuels and additives. So it must meet the federal regulations. So that kind of created a whole new thing. Okay, so what are the federal regulations, right? Unfortunately, I ran out of time and all the presentations I got to make here lately. But in this case, it kind of makes you ask, what is the federal requirement, right? So this is for the state of Nevada here that I saw this. So therefore, it was kind of interesting on what they're saying. So in other words, you can't just say, hey, I'm going to go collect French fry oil, the burger oil, or fish oil from the local restaurants and stuff, and I'm going to make my own bio. Nope, you got to actually have some kind of standard. So, but in this case, that was the U.S. Code of Federal Regulation. Now, but it also states right there, if you can barely read it, is an ASTM standard 6751. So that was pretty interesting to see here for the state of Nevada, if you see this on the top there. So Nevada seems to have strict guidelines, but I know that other states don't, like Ohio. They don't have that I know of, because when I was there, oh my God, I met some people that are making their blends and selling their blends. So kind of makes you interesting what it knows. So it kind of explains why my buddy that was selling biodiesel may have been selling it under the radar that I didn't realize, because again, they cannot sell it unless it meets the ASTM requirement. And I knew that biodiesel we used on that trash truck did not meet the requirement, but it sure smelled good. Made me hungry for French fry oil, French fries. Anyways, all right, moving on. We got Cloud Point. And cloud point is better known, and we mentioned it already, is the cold weather handling properties of the fuel itself. So cloud point of diesel fuel is the temperature at which it begins to form wax crystals, giving it a cloudy appearance. So the cloud point varies depending on the type of diesel, the amount of paraffin it contains, and any other diesel fuel blends it's mixed with, because we don't know what it is, right? So in this case, that's a problem. So here's some general guidelines for cloud point of different types of diesels. And this is something I saw and collected from different articles. Number one, diesel can withstand temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees. The problem is, what did we say earlier? Not to contradict myself, but yeah, it could work, but you better use some anti-gelling. Remember that? So therefore, it will solidify. That's why they even covered their butts when they made this definition. Again, it all depends on the amount of paraffin it contains and any other diesel blends that's in it. Okay, so we're talking about ultra low sulfur fuel here. Okay, number one and number two. Well, number two has a cloud point of what? Minus 18 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So therefore, that's what we use every day. And again, number one is for extreme cold. So have we seen cases where it's extremely cold under minus 30 with the wind chill factor, if not colder? That's where, even though they're using number one diesel, you still got to use some anti-gelling agents. So it is surprising they do that. So, well, again, standard diesel for the most part has a cloud point of 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So like I said at the beginning of this presentation, when we were talking about when to use anti-gelling agents, it comes down to somewhere around what? Freezing point. So freezing point 30 degrees could be something that you could use as a reference for those of you that go from, warm areas to colder areas. So when I talk to my Southern California guys, or guys in Arizona, they go up to the mountains to get really cold. Yeah, it is a good idea. They may need to purchase some kind of gelling agent. So, all right, switching gears again. R99. We said we were going to look at R99. R99 seems to be a California thing at this point. I don't know what other states are taking this on. I would guess Wisconsin and New Jersey, because those are some of the states that tend to follow suit with California. But in this case, it all comes down to the emission regulations that they have put on forth. But before you start getting ticked off and glowing red, not blue, let me just get this across. R99 is also known as a renewable diesel or green diesel. It is a transportation fuel that is chemically similar to petroleum diesel, but made from non-petroleum sources. So like I said already, how does renewable diesel differ from biodiesel? It has no ultra low sulfur diesel with it. Okay, it is 100% what? Some kind of stock that it is used that comes from waste products like animal fats, vegetable oils, and agricultural waste. What that is in detail, I've been trying to get a list put together. I didn't have it in time, but a lot of it is, well, you can go from there, food products and so on. So in this case, you can see that under search oil. So when I did a search on oils, this is what we came up to get with. So you can do yourself a search, but here's the thing. It is no easy task. That's where that transesterification comes in to actually make that renewable diesel. So from Chevron Renewable Energy Group, known as the CRE G group, you're going to find that they had this information available about R99. So one of the things that they use is, again, used cooking oil, distillers corn oil, animal fat, soybean oil, and canola oil. Now in Hawaii, like I said earlier, they're using sunflower oil too as well. So these oils have quite an effect in the combustion process that has the attributes of diesel. So in this case, that's what they're using. So again, renewable diesel, R99, is pretty much 99% of this feedstock. Okay, that's what you're using. So isomerization is the chemical reaction that rearranges the carbon molecules without adding or subtracting atoms. While hydrotreating is the process of reacting those feedstocks with hydrogen in order to remove the atoms from other carbon and hydrogen. So in this case, the three final products of the hydrotreating of this and isomerization process are renewable diesel, renewable naphtha, and renewable propane. So what they're getting out of this process, again, I just skimmed on that because we're not chemists here. We just gave you a brief look on how they actually make the actual renewable diesel. So in this case, they're not only creating renewable diesel, but renewable naphtha and renewable propane coming out of it. And I guess I can get into this because of the fact that we're actually recycling and using a lot of this stock that probably was waste in the past to actually make fuel. Not a bad idea. So in this case, that's where we get the renewable diesel. I know what you're probably saying to yourself right now. What is the mileage I'm going to get out of it? What's going to happen here? What's the cost and so on? Well, let's keep going because I did do some homework on this, but it actually works pretty damn well to actually create that renewable diesel. Now, the process that separates the renewable diesel, the renewable naphtha, and renewable propane is also called fractionation. So in this case, they separate that. So this all takes place from these, I want to call them refineries, but we can also call them, again, processors that actually create that renewable diesel, naphtha, and propane. So that's what they're doing now in California. So and by the way, just type in R99 diesel and you're going to get a lot of people, especially from California, giving their opinions about the use of renewable diesel. As a matter of fact, there are people that are now recommending that they're only going to use renewable diesel, right? Well, yes and no, because you got options here. And let me discuss those options as I go forward. But for now, let's just understand the basics. So because renewable diesel can be produced from a wide array of organic feedstocks, and there's a lot of waste out there, its lower carbon intensity score can help meet the regulatory requirements like states in California. So in this case, it can actually create less soot, less sulfur out in the air. So therefore it does work. Let's take a look at these numbers here. Compared to ultra low sulfur diesel, renewable diesel reduces total hydrocarbons by more than 10%, particulate matter by nearly 40%. Kind of tells you how we're burning a lot of those carbon-based particles. And if you haven't learned what particulate matter is, you should. There's PM what, PM12, PM40, and so on. You got to understand how that could be bad. And if the black soot that accumulates on the tailpipe doesn't tell you anything, this is kind of a drastic reduction on particulate matter, which means that if this truck has an after treatment system and is using this type of fuel, you're talking about less regenerations, a lot less regenerations. But it also has carbon monoxide reduced by 25% and nitrogen oxide, which is NOx, by 15%. So therefore, it does work for emission requirements. So again, you can hear what I have to say about it. I'm not using it because we don't have it here yet in Las Vegas, but in California, you're going to see a lot of YouTube videos of people talking about how they think it's pretty good stuff. Now, please note, due to the fact that it's renewable diesel and it comes from, again, all this stock that we talked about, please note that the lubrication factor is pretty damn good. In other words, it does work very, very well. So you're probably saying to yourself, what's the nitty gritty when it comes to cost? Well, the price of R99 renewable diesel and ultra low sulfur diesel can vary depending on location. That is true. But in California, two fuels are often comparable in price. I did a study that was brought out back in January of this year, and the average price was $5.37 a gallon for R99, while ultra low sulfur diesel was $5.25, which doesn't surprise me. So if that is a significant difference for you, and you still have the choice for ultra low sulfur diesel, go ahead. But again, the question is, how good quality is that ultra low sulfur diesel? Well, we know that renewable diesel does have a standard there. So they do have a standard. In other words, the renewable diesel I might find at this fuel station is other fuel station. Is it going to be the same quality? And the answer is yes, right? So therefore, it does have certain qualities that will provide A for better regeneration. Just on regeneration alone, I know I just mentioned it. Just think about this. If we're running active regeneration sooner, that means we're going to consume more fuel, because if we're doing active regenerations in the truck, we're going to be consuming more fuel. So therefore, by running renewable diesel, I can actually get better fuel economy. Look at it that way. So there is a cost savings when it comes to miles per gallon. However, though, I didn't make a slide on this because I couldn't get a clear answer. I saw two different sides of the story, and obviously the manufacturers or the refinery companies such as Chevron and Shell and so on, they're going to give you their plus, because what I asked was, are you getting better miles per gallon using renewable diesel? And it seems to be 50-50. Okay, some people are saying, no, I'm getting worse mileage. Some people are saying, I'm getting better fuel. I don't know if it's city driving. I don't know if it's highway. We got to research that more. However, though, what we do know is the cost is slightly more for ultra low sulfur diesel versus the renewable diesel. Okay, so that's something we got to keep in mind. Again, just to make sure you're hearing me correctly, when we're talking about renewable diesel, remember, this is 100% stock, right? Because we are using all these stocks that I mentioned already that are being used, all the oils, if you will. So therefore, be aware of that, while ultra low sulfur diesel is petroleum based. Now, as I was doing the research, I found out there's something called R95, right? So there's R95, renewable diesel, but it is a type of renewable diesel that's 95% or 99% renewable diesel, and is indicated by an orange decal. Renewable diesel is a type of diesel fuel that's made from renewable sources like soybean oil and cooking oil instead of crude oil. It's chemically identical to petroleum diesel and meets the ASTM D975 specification. So it does have a certification for 95. The way I look at it, it's actually renewable diesel, 95% of it, and 5% is actually ultra low sulfur diesel. That's the way I understood it. So in this case, that's the way we look. So when you look at the pump, there is renewable diesel R99, and then there's now R95 available. So in this case, I'm guessing they created this because of price, to be more competitive with ultra low sulfur diesel. But we got to live in that environment. So you California people can probably give me a better look at it than what we can from us from out of state. But in this case, it is out there. Then, upon doing further research, I found another one. There's Propel, the HPR. Now, when I saw the HPR, I'm like, what is HPR? It is a high performance, low carbon, renewable diesel fuel that is designed to enhance the performance of clean diesel engines, right? It is made from recycled fats and oils just like renewable diesel, but its performance, they're stating, is that it outperforms petroleum diesel, which is your ultra low sulfur diesel, and biodiesel in performance, emissions, and value, right? So it does meet the ASTM D975 again standards, but in this case it is also, you can mix it with ultra low, by the way, you can mix all these with ultra low sulfur diesel, but again it is actually a better performing, which I did see a lot of people talking about this and articles about this, mentioning that, hey, this actually has better fuel economy than your conventionals that are out there. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this is a better quality. So you're probably saying to yourself, Tony, you've thrown a lot of us in this short time. In this short hour, I'm already at the 53-minute counter here. And in this case, yeah, because there's top tier, right? There's ultra low sulfur diesel, low sulfur diesel, and then there's the bio, depending what bio content it is, from B2 to B5 to B20, B50, B100. And then you got the R99, then you got R95, and then you got the high performance, right? So, not to mention, we mentioned again the top tier. So in this case, you're like, whoa, there's a lot of fuel stuff going on, but it's all based on the emission aspect of it when it comes to your California-based renewable diesel. So is it big business? Yeah, it's going to be big business because, with the use of renewable diesel, you're taking advantage of recycling using that waste oils, those waste cooking oils, and so on. And in this case, you're burning it. They figured out through the refining, transesterification, and other, like we saw in the slides. Again, I'm no chemist, but in this case, we saw that they're able to meet that cloud point for cold driving ability to actually make it work. So therefore, that kind of tells you what's going on. Here's my question, though, which I couldn't get an answer, and I'm going to get an answer hopefully soon. I'll update you guys as soon as I remember to do this, but is that okay? If I'm using R99 and I drive to cold area and it gets I have sudden drop in temperature, is the anti-gel additives that are sold for ultra low sulfur diesel work with R99? I don't know. So in this case, I'm sure some of you may know. If you know, give me a message when you post it, because this video will be posted on the Lucas YouTube channel. You can give me a notice, but in this case, we're trying to get our hands on figuring that out here. So, but in this case, there you go. So I don't see it as a bad thing. In our industry, we tend to fight change. And after looking at the numbers and after researching this, because I'm only giving you details of all the notes that I took and everything that I found, but it's, renewable diesel looks like a pretty good thing, when it comes to the common oil, especially with the fact that, you're not running that biodiesel that may be contaminated. Because like you found out with the ASTM certification, there's many companies out there that are selling the biodiesel mixed with ultra low sulfur diesel that you don't know how clean it is. You don't know how much paraffin content it is, in other words, the wax, and the glycerin content that's in it. So in this case, that's the problem. So I've never been a fan, in case you guys want to know, I've never been a fan of biodiesel because, again, the problem I always found was it was not, biodiesel that's certified. So there you go. Okay, so therefore, keep it basic though. When we're still talking about diesel fuel, it is a good idea for you to do local testing because that will determine the life of your fuel system. We've said this before and I say it again. Lubricity is a problem. Contamination is a problem. So therefore, that's why in the past we did a presentation talking about fuel additives. Yes, if I am using ultra low sulfur diesel at 15 parts per million, it is a requirement now to actually use some type of fuel additive. But when we're talking about high performance renewable diesel, we're talking about top tier diesel. That's kind of taking away the need for the use of fuel additives. I hear say that again. When we, again, talk about using top tier or some type of high performance diesel, we're talking about not having the need to use any kind of additive if you really think about it. So therefore, us that are shops, and I'm sure a lot of you shops are out there, have been selling additives. You sell them by the case to the customer. You sell them the bottles, the little bottles to put every fill, And in this case, it kind of tells you that maybe by them setting a standard for top tier or for high performance, it is again eliminating the need for any kind of fuel additive. Because I'll be honest with you, as a diesel owner, it's a pain in the butt. I got to put this bottle, I got to carry this bottle, and it's smelly too, the bottles. And in this case, it's not fun to do. But in this case, I know that it's needed and I put it in. I see the advantages. Hell, my truck has 140,000 miles and it still has the original set of injectors and it's an '06 model. So it kind of tells you again that running the proper additives does extend the life of a common rail system. And remember, those of you that haven't seen my other presentations, do we have people out there driving trucks using fuel additives with their conventional ultra low sulfur diesel that have in excess of 400, 500, 600,000 miles on their truck with the original pumps, the original injectors. Yeah. So therefore, pumps and injectors can live a long time with the proper fuel product, the proper additives, and also the proper filtration. In other words, maintenance. So yeah, it does work. So therefore, if you want your system, you want your customer's common rail system to live a long time, again, you have options now. In the past, we didn't have renewable diesel available. We had only bio. Now we have an option now, and then you can look at it that way as your state or county takes on these fuels, which we'll see probably grow through the upcoming years. So therefore, that's what you're going to see there. So don't be anti, keep an open mind, because it is another way of getting us away from petroleum-based fuel. So like I said already, is high performance fuel diesel worth it? Well, the answer is no to many people, because premium diesel isn't guaranteed to last longer in terms of mileage or fuel efficiency. The main difference is that it usually contains cleaning agents, like I said. In other words, eliminating the need for fuel additives. These can help your engine last longer in the long term, but provide short-term durability benefits. So therefore, that's what you're going to see. And remember, if you're going to price out high performance diesel and compare it to bio, yeah, bio will be cheaper. But again, repeating for the fifth, sixth time in this presentation, hopefully it's in your heads now, is it actually, again, certified? You don't know if it's any good. So beware of that. So you get these people, and as a matter of fact, I actually have done Craigslist searches. I haven't done it on Facebook to see who sells biodiesel at different places I travel to, and it's funny what you find. It's like this guy selling some kind of biodiesel. So they're trying to make money off of that, because most of them probably get those vegetable oils or those cooking oils for nothing or close to nothing. And in this case, they're trying to make their own biodiesel, So it burns. It works great on my old 7.3, yeah, but it's going to clog up your newer common rail system. So hopefully you've learned about that. So definitely have learned about this when it comes to diesel fuel. It does help you a lot in understanding what's going on. So definitely want to get a grasp, do some more research, type in renewable diesel in your Google search, type in R99, R95, and you might be in for a good awakening. And last but not least, if you are selling your customer a complete fuel system, you're selling them a complete fuel system, whether it be injectors, pumps, and so on, it's all costly. Will you please test the fuel? And if you're not one of those that is dropping the fuel tank and checking that fuel, or just putting all new good quality fuel, test that fuel, because you don't know where your customer is buying the fuel. You need to ask them, hey, where are you buying this fuel? Is it good fuel? Maybe they ought to change to a more reputable name brand fuel station, right? And you need to ask them, are you using a good quality fuel? So very important to understand. So we like to thank Lucas for actually sponsoring this webinar. We hope it does help. I'll be available later on to answer questions or anything you want. I try to be as correct as possible. I use different sources for this. I called a few people, so it's not something I just made up here to help you answer those questions. But Erica and David are available to answer any questions. I'm also available at Tony, like in Tony, T Salas, S-A-L-A-S, at Diesel. If you know how to spell diesel. If you're watching diesel presentation, you know how to spell diesel. But T Salas at Diesel TG, which is training group, dieseltg.com. Again, T Salas at dieseltg.com. I hope you learned something. I look forward to seeing you guys live once again at the next. Again, for those of you that just watching this video, I apologize for not being live. I had travel arrangements, so by the time this goes live, I'm going to be probably in the air flying again to, actually, where am I flying to? Cincinnati, Kentucky, I'm flying to go do some work. So with that said, thank you, God bless, and we'll see you until the next time.